Novelty. Reality becomes more novel as we approach the present, and this is certainly true of biology and many, many phenomena. But there is an important exception, so I'm told. I'm not yet entirely convinced of this, but convinced enough to pass it on. And that is, though this obviously contains a paradox, languages seem to be more complicated as you go back in time. Structurally and in number of words. So that, for instance, Old English is considerably richer in certain areas than modern English. Now, I say probably what's happening is that technical vocabularies are keeping the boat roughly at equilibrium. But, you know, for every widget word, a word describing some subset of our technology, if we're losing words that indicate emotional nuances or nuances of rapport and understanding, then the language is being impoverished. Most scholars of English believe that, you know, Shakespeare caught the wave. Shakespeare is not only a phenomenon of immense human genius focused in one person, but it's also a moment of incredible linguistic richness and opportunity that didn't exist 200 years before and didn't survive 200 years after. Well, but as I lay in the tubs at Esalen, a vast vocabulary of subtle gradients of interpersonal states of angst, longing, need, rejection, triumph, and defeat are passed in front of me. And frankly, I'd rather read my manual on my hard disk sometimes. But I'm a tough nut to crack. But this does lead on to an aspect of all this that I wanted to talk about, which is language is, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it said, it's a double-edged sword because it liberates as it enslaves. All clarity is achieved by the sacrifice of true identity. You know, the world is actually a messy and difficult to articulate place. And if you can make it all seem very simple and smooth running, then you're a con artist of some sort. Yeah, I mean.
I've always said, as soon as I speak, I already lie.
Yes, well, one group of linguists suggests probably the big impulse producing language originally was the wish to lie. Said, if only I could deceive people more. And I always, you know, along this line, the wonderful thing which Winston Churchill said at the height of World War II, he said, truth is so precious that she must always be accompanied by a bodyguard of lies. That's an interesting point of view. The truth is not something you trot out and show everybody, that you surround truth with lies so that only the discerning, you know, we simple, straightforward, plain dealers don't think like that. But believe me, you get with an Amazonian shaman or someone like that, he is not operating under a strong moral obligation to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as quickly as he possibly can. No, it's all about leading you this way and then dropping you and watching you wiggle and then leading you another way. And eventually, because truth is guarded, this is in our society, the commodification of information has made it something that you want to deliver with maximum punch to its target audience as fast as possible and cash the check and get out. But that is not traditionally how it's done. Well, it divides the seamlessness of reality into the articulated and the unarticulated. You know, Trumbull Stickney, who's not exactly a household name, was one of those poets who died in the trenches of World War I, the Golden Generation. And he wrote a poem called Meaning's Edge. And he said in that poem, "I do not understand you. 'Tis because I lean over your meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of the things that you have not said." And it's that the dizziness of things unsaid that always surrounds the enterprise of communication, especially spoken language. Now, to go back to this thing about the evolution of language and technology, and are we getting better or worse at it, communication, I discern, at least if you look at the evolution of media the way we would look at the evolution of a species or a group of genera in an organic situation, a very pronounced preference for the visual. We, from simply the idea of colorful and rich speech, which was all we had for a long time, gives way in the early 19th century to photography. And it's still, and it's black and white. But immediately the people who invent it can think of nothing but color and motion. And by 1900, they've got that under control. And then there's stuff like stereophonic sound and on and on. Clearly, we view the language-forming enterprise as a task not yet brought to completion. One of the things that seems to always come up in these things is the fact that so-called primitive or aboriginal or pre-literate people using psychedelic plants that melt local cultural conditioning seem to access a place where language is much more a visual enterprise. Ayahuasca circles sing, but the singing is critiqued as though it were pictorial activity. In other words, after the shaman stops singing, you hear people saying, "I like the part with the orange spots, but I thought the olive drab magenta section was self-indulgent," or something like that. And you're thinking, this is a critique of a song. No, the song is the sound, is the carrier. The acoustical wave is no longer in the foreground of the experience of appreciating the performance. It has become the carrier of something visible. And, a lot of people think that somewhere in the human future lies telepathy. And it's usually imagined as you hear what I think, a kind of extension of what we have. But I think it's more likely to develop along the lines of you see what I need. In other words, we add dimensionality to language, and we then can walk around in it. I touched on some of this last night with the virtual reality. Because virtual reality, in the service of the ideals that I'm interested in, would become a technology for showing each other the contents of our imagination with less ambiguity than we have ever had before. Yeah. Well, I suppose every technology has created more opportunity for deception. You can't have complex illusionistic realities unless you work in pictorial space. Yes, I don't think these technologies will reform the human character. Also, I'm not sure subterfuge is a major part of art. It certainly is a major part of legerdemain. Every sentence is essentially a conjuration. And, the rabbit of meaning is pulled out of the hat of constructive syntax. So you cannot have truth unless you allow for the possibility of error.